Support for WCBU's On Deck comes from State Farm agent Aaron Kilgore. Aaron and his team offer individualized insurance coverage plans to community members at their Sterling Plaza location. Information on home, life, and auto insurance at aaronismyagent.com. This is WCBU.
A new book out of Pekin attempts an academic evaluation of the Trump White House. That's just one of the things you'll want to hear about to start your day for Monday, April 15th. I'm Colin Shope, and this is WCBU's On Deck. First on deck today, Doug Ptolemy argues nature conservation starts in your own yard. His book, Nature's Best Hope, is this year's selection for the Peoria Reads citywide literacy program. Ptolemy, a professor at the University of Delaware, says America's 44 million acres of grassy lawns are actively harmful.
It is there because it's a status symbol, because it's convenient, but it is an ecological disaster.
He says grass lawns fail when it comes to sustainable practices like supporting pollinators and sequestering carbon. So what to do instead?
You can still have a really nice looking landscape. That includes lawn, but much less of it.
Ptolemy suggests introducing native plants to the areas of the lawn you never walk upon. He says this can be done in small steps rather than one big revamp if a homeowner finds the prospect daunting. But he says it's something well worth doing.
It's fun, but it's also, I talk about personal responsibility. We all need functioning ecosystems.
The Peoria Public Library is hosting a virtual author event with Ptolemy on April 17th from 7 to 8:30 in the evening, and registration is free. Here are some other stories we're following in the WCBU newsroom. This year's expected boom in the number of cicadas in central Illinois will not just be loud, it will be a bonanza for other animals. And a Springfield proposal aimed at holding funeral homes accountable for their treatment of human remains has passed the Illinois Senate. This follows the discovery of serious issues at some Illinois funeral homes, including misidentified remains and unsanitary conditions. Plus, overnight full closures on Interstate 474 start tonight. The Illinois Department of Transportation will close eastbound 474 at Airport Road from 10 in the evening to 5:30 tomorrow morning. Find more of these stories and all the details at WCBU.org. To say that Donald Trump was a president unlike any other isn't breaking news. Most either love him or hate him, with very few somewhere in between. The Dirksen Congressional Center's new book, Disruption, attempts to take an academic look at how Trump changed the U.S. Senate during his 4 years in office. WCBU's Tim Shelley has more.
By design, the U.S. Senate is kind of like an institutional bulwark resisting change. That's anathema to a disruptive leader like Trump, who as president needs Congress to accomplish much of his agenda.
And so these two extremes, putting them together and testing out this theory of the relationship between the presidency and the U.S. Senate under those circumstances seemed like a really important question to ask.
That's Tiffany White, executive director of the Dirksen Center. A coterie of 18 professionals in various fields contributed their takes on that relationship. That includes Dr. Sean Theriault, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin and author of Disruption. When Trump was elected back in 2020, the Senate was led by fellow Republican Mitch McConnell. Yet despite sharing many priorities, Theriault says the relationship did see its share of personality clashes.
When the goals were aligned, they got along hand in glove, and we can think of everything from Supreme Court nominations to reducing taxes. But then when it comes to other things, such as the tradition laid in Senate or the tradition laid in presidency, you saw them act very differently.
Judicial confirmations in particular are an area where Trump and the GOP-led Senate saw a high degree of cooperation in shifting the courts to the right. The appointments of 3 Supreme Court justices solidified the court's conservative majority, and that's not to mention a slew of appellate and district court judge appointments. Tiffany White says Senate historian emeritus Don Ritchie offers perspective in one chapter. He traces the push on the norms of the judicial nomination process back as far as the Clinton presidency.
It came to a crescendo during the Trump administration, but I really appreciate Don's perspective that he offers to readers about the circumstances that I think really created the groundwork for what we saw in between 2016 and 2020.
Sean Theriault notes increased polarization now leads government to essentially grind to a halt when the White House and the Congress are controlled by opposite parties. He says that's elevated the importance of the courts, which are now handing down decisions he says were unthinkable even a decade ago. That's enabled in part, he says, by the breakdown of the lawmaking process.
Part of that is Trump as disruptor. Part of that is Trump as accelerant. But clearly, all of the blame does not belong at his feet. We see the court playing a much more prominent role, which means that when there are vacancies, the politics surrounding the filling of those vacancies takes on an even bigger role in determining national policy making.
Theriault acknowledges that taking a stab at an objective analysis of recent U.S. history is challenging. He says that's why the book pulls in not only historians, but also journalists, political scientists, former Senate staffers, and others.
Each of the different subfields brought a different perspective so that we could have a really nuanced picture of what Disruption ? Was all about.
White says the Dirksen Center's mission is educational, and the book doesn't really try to lead the reader to one particular conclusion on how President Trump impacted the Senate.
I think that regardless of a reader's bias coming into the book, whether they like Donald Trump or whether they don't like Donald Trump, I think that their preconceived notions will in some ways be challenged, but also in some ways be enhanced or supported.
For his part, Theriault says he's proud that Disruption didn't wrap up with a neat conclusion or consensus on the complicated question the book poses.
What I think of is we provided lots of building blocks, but the building that the reader will assemble after reading this book, it could be very different just given what the things that they value.
Disruption, will be released on May 7th. It's published by Oxford University Press. For WCBU's On Deck, I'm Tim Shelley.
Now before we let you go, an opportunity to hear original music from Bradley student composers tonight at the Dingledine Music Center. The new music concert is free to attend and starts at 7:30 p.m., featuring more than a dozen student compositions. And that's all for today. You can subscribe to WCBU's On Deck podcast on the NPR app, Apple, or Spotify.